everybody, and welcome to WTF Hammer Underworlds. So today I'm going to be covering the second warband of Season 2, that being the Thorns of the Briar Queen. And they have a pretty extensive lore here, which I've copied and pasted from the Warhammer Underworlds website, which basically describes the Briar Queen as being an enemy of Shadespire who was basically captured and sentenced to eternal prison, who eventually lost her mind and kind of transformed into a sort of banshee while still retaining some of her necromantic powers that she had before she was captured. In this review video, I'm going to be checking out this warband's fighter cards, their faction-specific cards, and I'm going to rate them on a scale of S to D, S being very powerful and D needing lots of support. Starting by looking at the fighter cards. So this is actually a really big warband. There's 7 units in this warband. They all have the same Inspire mechanic where they have to be adjacent to an enemy fighter at the beginning of their activation. And they're all ghosts as well, which I'll be getting to in a minute, but let's just zoom in on each of these fighters. Starting with the Briar Queen. So Briar Queen is very badass. She has 2 magic characteristic, which isn't super valuable without Gambit cards because she has no spell attack action, but her physical attack is brutal. I mean, range 2, 3 swords even when uninspired, going up to 3 damage when inspired. As a ghost, she's immune to blocked hexes and lethal hexes, which is very powerful. Movement doesn't start off great, but it does increase to 4, and with the reach 2, she can still reach enemies that are far away. 2 dodge all the time, 4 wounds, very tough to take out, very dangerous. Almost equally dangerous is Varclav the Cruel, who typically does not get used for combat because of his amazing special ability to push all friendly chain rasps up to 2 hexes, which now, since the errata, can only be used once per round, but still allows him to push 5 units, 2 hexes, which is like really incomparable when you look at power cards that other warbands have. He can do 3 damage when inspired, also very difficult to kill, 2 dodge even when uninspired, and 4 wounds. And now the first Chain Rasp, who's actually a very solid Chain Rasp, is the Everhanged, who has 3 wounds, 1 dodge going to 2 dodge when inspired, can cleave for 2 damage, 2 hammers, gets all those Chain Rasp benefits, of course, and then being a ghost, like everybody in this warband, is immune to lethal and blocked hexes. And then we have the actual Chain Rasps themselves, who are actually a bit individualized. So they all have 1 dodge and 2 dodge when inspired with 2 wounds. This particular Chain Rasp gets 2 hammers, 1 damage with cleave when inspired. This one has a little bit more high accuracy with the 3 swords for 1 damage, and he has knockback. This one goes to 2 swords for 2 damage, 1 sword for 1 damage uninspired, 1 sword for 2 damage uninspired, and this final Chain Rasp is exactly the same as the previous one. So let's just take a look at these fighter cards, looking at the pros and cons. Pros being very abundant. They have that special push ability, which is the most powerful ability in the game, no doubt. They had to errata it so it wouldn't be used frequently per round, which was a very smart choice by Games Workshop. They have a spellcaster. They're immune to terrain, which now, since you can just place lethal hexes with board setup, makes these guys super dangerous and just gives them a huge advantage over all other warbands. They have some special combat abilities. They have knockback and they have cleave. They have a range 2 attacker, which is the Briar Queen. Good defense when inspired. They all go to 2 dodge, which is great. Briar Queen and Varclav start with 2 dodge. Good accuracy, basically across the board, minus a couple Chain Rasps. High damage, Briar Queen can do 3 damage with 3 swords when inspired. Good movement, they go up to 4 movement. Large model number, gives them many flexible options. Super powerful fighter cards. And the cons are pretty minor. They have a dangerous Inspire mechanic, admittedly, where they can only be inspired when they're already adjacent to an enemy at the beginning of that player's turn, which isn't super easy to pull off, although with Varclav's push mechanic, it makes it much easier. And also with large model number, they have several low wound units, which can make them susceptible to aggressive warbands who can pull in a lot of glory from taking out your weaker Chain Rasps. So that does it for the fighter cards. Let's look at this warband's objective cards. They have all 3 types. They have Surge, they have Score in the end phase, they have Score in the 3rd end phase cards. Starting with the Surge, we have Death Sentence. Score this immediately if 3 or more friendly fighters are adjacent to the same enemy fighter, worth 1 glory point. I'm giving this a B. Could be worth an A. Just if you draw this in later rounds when you don't have a lot of Chain Rasps left, this is hard to score. It also forces you to cluster and put your units next to enemy fighters, which could make them vulnerable to getting killed by aggressive warbands. Next, we have Deathly Clutches. Score this immediately when 2 or more friendly fighters become inspired at the start of your activation, worth 1 glory point. I mean, I gave this a B, but it's probably worth an A because it's not too difficult to get 2 units inspired, and it's a score immediately card, so maybe A. I put it as B, but A seems more appropriate now that I'm looking at the card again. Next, for 2 glory points, score this immediately if 3 or more friendly fighters made a successful attack action in this phase. I'm giving this an A because clearly it's hard to pull off 3 successful attack actions, but the fact that it's worth 2 glory as a score immediate card is very powerful. Next, there's Swarming Spirits. Score this immediately if 2 or more friendly fighters moved through a hex occupied by an enemy fighter in this phase, worth 1 glory point. I gave it a B because one of the main ways that units will move is through Varklav's push mechanic, which cannot be used to score this card. Although, if you do have an enemy who's close to your units as a whole, this becomes almost a sure score as long as you're willing to spend 2 movements or 2 charges to move through that unit in order to score this card. So also could potentially be an A. It's a little bit tricky with this warband. I was having a little bit of a harder time grading the cards, but these 2 Bs that I mentioned could be 2 As. And finally, Treacherous Foe. Score this immediately if your warband makes a reaction, worth 1. That's an S because you're going to be making a reaction at some point, and this just scores immediately off of that, which is just amazing. So next we're going to look at the score in the end phase cards. Starting with Execution. Score this in an end phase if your warband took an enemy leader out of action in the preceding action phase, worth 1 glory point. I'm giving this a C because it's hard to do and it's worth 1 glory point in an end phase. Take the City. Score this in an end phase if you hold all objectives in 1 or more game boards, worth 1 glory point. I'm giving this a C as well because it's not super difficult to pull off, especially with your very high movement capacity because of Varklav's ability, but it's only worth 1 glory point in an end phase. If it was worth 2, I'd give this thing an S. The Vengeful Dead. Score this in an end phase if all surviving friendly fighters, at least 3, are inspired, worth 1 glory point. Also giving this a C because I haven't played too many games against Briar Queen or with Briar Queen where all my units got inspired. Usually you just have a select few get inspired in order to wreak some havoc on your enemy, but having the whole group of 7 potentially get inspired for 1 glory point is very challenging. And then finally, Vengeful Advance. Score this in an end phase if all your surviving friendly fighters are in your opponent's territory, worth 1 glory point. Also very hard to pull off unless a lot of your units are taken out of action, so I'm giving this a D. Finally, we have the score in the 3rd end phase card, which is as Nagash commands. Score this in the 3rd end phase if no enemy fighters are holding objectives, worth 2 glory. I'm giving this a B because there is a very useful spell, which I'll be describing later, that can really manipulate enemy positions well, knocking them off of objectives, and it's worth 2 glory, but the fact that it's a score in the 3rd end phase makes it kind of less appealing. All right, so that does it with the objective cards, which in general promote surrounding and moving through enemies, becoming inspired, entering enemy territory, holding objective tokens, preventing the enemy from holding objective tokens, and making successful attack actions. Now let's take a look at the power cards, starting with the Gambit cards. So there's ploys and spells for this warband. I'll be starting with the ploys though. Drifting Advance. Push all friendly chain rasps up to 2 hexes. This push must take them closer to the nearest enemy fighter in each case. If there is more than 1 nearest enemy fighter, you can choose which chain rasp is pushed towards. I mean, this is an S. I think this is probably the best card in the game. I mean, you could potentially have 5 units each get pushed 2, which if you trigger it right before your activation could just inspire tons of units. This is an amazing card. Endless Malice. As a reaction, play this after a friendly fighter's attack action that fails. That fighter can make another attack action that targets the same fighter. Now, I've put this as a B, but I've recently been convinced that these reroll cards are actually worth an A. I only put it as a B to be consistent because all other reroll cards that I've made review videos for, I have put as a B in the past. So like I said, for consistency, I'm putting it as a B here, but I am kind of convinced that it's an A, especially considering that this is a reaction and that this warband can score an objective card from playing reaction cards. Freezing Fear. Choose an enemy fighter, adjacent to your leader, place a move token next to the enemy fighter. I'm giving this a B. Transfixing Stare is better, although I'd realize that it is going to rotate out, but your Briar Queen typically is going to attack people from a range of 2, so I don't imagine this card getting too much play. Grasping Chains. Each friendly chain rasp providing support in the first attack action in the next activation is considered to be 2 supporting fighters. I'm giving this a B because it is nice to get that extra support, and they do kind of cluster attacks. So this could be an A2. I'm having a bit of a hard time with this warband because there's so many different ways to play them. That cluster attacking is one, but also holding objectives is another. So this could be an A or a B. Maddening Cackle. As a reaction, play this after an enemy fighter's attack action that fails. That fighter is no longer inspired and cannot be inspired. This effect persists. This is a hard S. I mean, this card cripples warbands. If you have a warband that really relies on one fighter becoming inspired, like Molag or Hrothgorn or Eyes of the Nine, this can just completely destroy their entire game from one missed attack, which is really high chances of occurring, considering that all of the units in this warband can have 2 dodge characteristics. Spectral Parry. Choose a friendly fighter that does not have a guard token and give them a guard token. That's B, so it's just a solid guard. Could also be an A because these guys are dodge characteristics, so it gives them shield as well, which really highly increases their odds of not getting hit. Spectral Touch. The first attack action in the next activation has Cleave. I'm giving this a B because it's nice to be able to have Cleave, but you do have a few guys who inherently have Cleave anyway. And if you're playing against a dodgy warband, this card is useless. Sudden Appearance. So good that it is already been restricted. Choose a friendly fighter and place them on any starting hex. Always ends up being the Briar Queen. I'm giving this an S because way too often I've started a match against the Briar Queen who plays this card right before their first activation, ends up next to my leader, inspires, smacks me, and then plays a pit trap or something and just takes my leader out before I can even do anything. This card is super powerful. Vengeful Curse. Reaction. Play this after an enemy fighter's attack action that takes an adjacent friendly fighter out of action. Their attacker suffers 1 damage. So I'm giving this a B. It's a nice little parting gift if one of your units gets taken out of action, but it's also conditional on the adjacent factor. And that does it for the ploys. So as far as spells go, there is Howling Vortex. With 1 focus, you can push all enemy fighters 1 hex. This is an S as well. This is an amazing spell if you pull it off, which is not super unlikely. I mean, it's pretty good odds to be successful. Pushing every enemy fighter 1 hex, I mean, it can just destroy the plans of a warband. And Rending Scream. 2 channel. If this spell is cast, each enemy fighter adjacent to the caster suffers 1 damage. I'm giving this a C because, like I mentioned, Briar Queen will tend to hit people from range 2 and typically doesn't want to get in the middle of a horde of people because then that would just compromise her safety. So that does it for the gambits, which typically promote pushing fighters, inhibiting enemy movement, increasing the accuracy of attacks, uninspiring enemy fighters, improving defense, teleporting friendly fighters, and causing damage. Which leads me now to the upgrades. We have Chill Touch, which is unique to all 5 Chain Rasps. Rolls of dodge are not successes for defense rolls made during attack actions made by this fighter. So basically gives them Ensnare. I'm giving this a B. It's a nice card. Creeping Terror. Reaction. After this fighter makes a move action, roll an attack dice for the first enemy fighter they move through in that action. On a hammer or crit, that fighter suffers 1 damage. I'm giving this a B as well. I mean, it's nice. It's 50% chance to do 1 damage on the condition that you move. And it could be an A. Maybe I'm being a little bit too conservative in my assessment of these cards, but I gave it a B. Next card is restricted to the Briar Queen. It's Curse of Unbinding. As a reaction, during an enemy fighter's spell or spell attack action, if the spell is cast and the caster is within 3 hexes of this fighter, roll a magic die. On a roll of Swirl, that spell is not cast and is not resolved, so it's basically a counter spell. I'm giving it a B because I've never seen it played, and it relies on a lot of conditions. Driven by Hatred, +1 dice to their attack actions when this fighter makes a charge action. I'm giving this an A. Super nice. Can bring the Briar Queen up to 4 swords in terms of her accuracy. Face of Death, unique to Chain Rasps. As a reaction, during an adjacent enemy fighter's attack action, before any dice are rolled, roll a defense dice. On a roll of shield or crit, your opponent rolls 1 fewer dice for the attack action, to a minimum of 1. I'm giving this a B because it provides a 50% chance to reduce an enemy's ability to hit you, which is nice, but it's not a sure thing. Grasping Thorns, restricted to the Briar Queen. As a reaction, after this fighter's successful attack action, you could push the target of that attack action up to 2 hexes. They must end this push adjacent to this fighter. So it's kind of like a pull after you've made an attack. I'm giving this a B because I don't know if you really want to pull units adjacent to the Briar Queen right before their turn. But you know, maybe it could be nice to pull units off of objectives or something, but then at that point you might as well just drive them back. So I just don't see this card being that valuable. It could be a C. Haunting Obsession. This fighter cannot be pushed while they are adjacent to any enemy fighters. If a push takes this fighter adjacent to any enemy fighters, the push ends in that hex. So I'm giving this a B because if you really don't want your Chain Rasps to get pushed in order to help them inspire, you could play this card on them. But of course that assumes they survive. It does allow the swarming aspect to maintain itself, which is nice. I'm giving it a B. Inescapable Vengeance, restricted to the Briar Queen. When this fighter makes a move or charge action, instead of moving them normally, you can place them on any starting hex. I'm giving this an A because it's a teleport card, which is beautiful. She has range too, so if you send her to a starting hex, there's probably something that's going to be within range of her to smack. Combine that with Driven by Hatred, and she gets the extra dice because she's charging. It's a very powerful card. We have a card unique to Varclav. 1 range, 3 hammer, 1 damage, Sadistic Strike. If the target has any wound tokens, this does +2 damage, so can make Varclav a pretty big badass if you want to go down that road. I'm giving it a B because I feel like his position of helping the chain rasps to get pushed is more useful than having him actually engage enemies in combat. Shacklegeist Chains. When this fighter attack action takes an enemy fighter out of action, gain 1 additional glory point, also unique to Varclav. Giving this a B as well for basically the same reasons. I don't see much incentive to have him engage in melee since the Briar Queen is so good at it, although the extra glory point is nice if you decide to take that road. And finally, Strangling Coil, unique to the Everhanged, 3 swords, 3 damage, 1 range. I'm giving it a B only because it's restricted to Everhang, but it actually is a really nice attack card. Alright, so this is basically the summary of all the power cards for Thorns of the Briar Queen. So as far as the upgrades are concerned, they promote improving accuracy of attacks, causing more damage, inhibiting enemy spellcasters, reducing enemy attack accuracy, altering enemy position, preventing driveback, increasing glory from killing for Varclav, teleporting your leader, and upgrading weapons in an unexceptional way except for Strangling Coil, which is pretty exceptional. And this is the big picture summary. So you see that objectives are actually not that amazing. I mean, there are a few that could move to A from B. So the objective cards are good, but not as much of a powerhouse as some of the newer Warband's objective cards. But gambits are amazing. I mean, 4 S tier gambits, I mean, those are ending up in everybody's deck every time, and they're always going to be awesome. Upgrades, some are very nice as they pertain to making the Briar Queen more dangerous. Most fall somewhere in the middle. So that does it for my full overlook of all of this Warband's cards. So now let's summarize it and rate this Warband. First point, this Warband is very strong at holding objective tokens, although they lack faction-specific cards to take full advantage of this, seeing as they don't have any objective cards that actually promote holding objectives, although they can benefit from universal cards, and they pretty much typically always do, and then they score tons of glory point because of it. Second point, they have a Dangerous Inspire mechanic, but they do have a power card to overcome it, which is basically the Varclav push card, but that's in power card form. They have good movement, allowing them to ignore obstacles. They do good damage, they have good accuracy, and they have an amazing special ability, meaning that they can overwhelm opponents with force while still scoring passive glory by holding objective tokens. I just put a WTF here because this Warband is the master of the flex style. And finally, they have a large number of very powerful power cards. They can perform feats that extend well beyond what other warbands are capable of, as I just went through. So when I look at this warband as a whole, considering the fighter cards and all of their faction-specific cards, this is the first warband that I would rate as an S. They're super strong, powerful in every meta, and honestly need a little bit of a nerf in order to make other warbands generally competitive against them. So that is my synopsis of the Thorns of the Briar Queen. In the description, I'm going to be posting a link to the balancing video that I'm going to make with regard to how to tweak this warband a little bit to make them, I guess a bit nerfed and on par with some of the other warbands. And I'll be posting that video in a couple days. And anyway, I hope that you liked this video. If you do like it, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, please comment below. And I thank you once again for watching this video, and I hope you all have a nice day.